At the dawn of the 20th century, the future of aviation is in the hands of a few visionaries and daredevils. In 1903, American brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright make 4 flights of a few dozen meters on a North Carolina beach. In 1909, Louis Blériot successfully flies across the English Channel, showing the world that an aeroplane can have a use other than aerobatics. Then, in 1913, Roland Garros takes off from Saint-Raphael in his monoplane and makes it to Bizerte in Tunisia in 7 hours and 53 minutes, the first crossing of the Mediterranean. The age of the pioneers ends suddenly in 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War. This will revolutionize the aeronautical industry and introduce new heroes. In August 1914, France, Russia and the British Empire are at war with the German and Austro-Hungarian empires. Germany has invaded Belgium, Luxembourg and northern France. Military aviation barely even exists in France, with a mere 130 aircraft in the whole country. The face of aviation is a hodgepodge of colors, shapes and sizes. The first warplanes are no more than civilian planes painted in military colors. Germany has 320 aircraft, of which fewer than half are in any fit state to fly. The Germans put their faith in Zeppelins, which are capable of covering thousands of kilometers and carrying up to 9 tons of bombs. The insular British soon realized the potential of military aviation and are the first to create an autonomous aerial force, the Royal Flying Corps. Unfortunately, they only have around 40 aircraft. The exploits of civilian airmen are thrilling young people, and the war presents an opportunity for many adventurous youths who want to become pilots, and many are ready to chance their arm. Georges Guynemer is 20 years old. 5 recruitment officers have declared him unfit for the army. This is no deterrent. His father tries to enroll him into the future Air Force.
I'm told that you think that all airmen are skivers.
I was an infantryman. I would have liked him to earn his stripes, but he doesn't want to know. He wants to fly.
Flying, that's all very well, but what do you expect us to do with him? Physically, he's a wreck. So? Infantry not good enough for you then, eh? Not like your father.
They think he's incapable of marching 40 kilometers a day, but they're wrong. Even if he is as skinny as a rake. He's a fine sportsman. He fences, plays tennis.
Do you know anything about machines? Anything at all?
He doesn't know, but he has studied and he almost got into Polytechnic. It's quite simple. He can do anything. He even drive my car.
In that case, I'll take you into the auxiliary service. You'll be a trainee mechanic.
Doing what?
You'll be helping the pilots to get into their planes, lad. You'll never need to use a weapon.
What do you take me for? Do you think I'm a coward?
That isn't what I said.
He wants to fight. He's wanted to enlist since the first day of the war.
Very well. I'll call the commander. Tell him we have a new volunteer.
Thank you.
Ah, right. We'll get him some overalls. Get his hands dirty. Just so it looks more convincing.
Well, it's a beginning.
At the start of the war in 1914, Guynemer is 20 years old. His father is an officer who has retired to live on his pension. His mother a distant descendant of the French royal family. At boarding school, Georges Guynemer is a reasonably good student, but as people would say today, rather rebellious.
Throughout his adolescence, Georges Guynemer was an excited follower of the daring do of the heroes of civil aviation. Men like Louis Blériot, Jules Védrine, and Roland Garros, their exploits enthralled the general public. But military aviation was still a pipe dream. The chiefs of staff took a dim view of these flying machines, considering them too flimsy to be of any use.
One has to remember that none of the nations wanted to, or even knew how, to fight a war from the air.
Mostly the generals were not over-enamoured with this machinery. It was a young man's fancy. They didn't believe that the airplanes would stay in the air that long. And as one general famously remarked, how can these young chaps see what's happening on the ground? When they're in the air, the ground must be just a blur.
There was no question of using a plane to fight. They could barely carry the weight of their pilots because their engines weren't powerful enough.
A group of young French pilots convinced the chiefs of staff to equip their aircraft with cameras. This marks the birth of aerial reconnaissance, and the army very quickly realizes the strategic importance of this.
In September 1914, the aircraft took off from an airfield near Paris. One of them was piloted by Louis Breguet. This was the moment when people realized how important aerial observation would be. He saw the German army, whom no one had suspected of being so close to Paris. And this would trigger the first Battle of the Marne.
Marshal Joffre knows how to make use of this intelligence in a counterattack which unites the French and British against the Germans in a great battle. Known as the Battle of the Marne, it is the first great Allied victory of World War I.
No one had imagined that in the wake of the Battle of the Marne, there would be such a great need for aeroplanes. German industry was not up to the job of responding quickly enough. It was also nigh on impossible to train enough competent pilots to make up for those already lost.
Developing an air force becomes a priority for both sides, but there is a shortage of everything. They will have to train the ground crews, the mechanics, and the pilots. There is a paucity of basic materials. France has lost 75% of its coal fields, 63% of its iron production, 81% of its cast iron, 90% of its brass, and all of its iron deposits in Lorraine. It is an industrial catastrophe. The French government will work alongside the constructors by paying over the odds in order to get the best of their technical know-how, unlike what is going on in Germany, where factories are being requisitioned. The Germans are one step ahead of the French and are already making advances with fighter aircraft.
Excuse me, are you not Lieutenant Bulker? I just want to say, your victories flying the Eindeck are extraordinary. What is your secret?
My secret? It's quite simple. I get as close as I possibly can to my opponent, I aim, and down he goes.
Hey, I'm nowhere near as efficient. Far from it. But I am just an observer. I depend on my pilot. He always does what he wants.
Perhaps it's you shooting all over the place. Become a pilot, sole master of your craft, then you will only have yourself to blame.
Oh, that is precisely my intention, to become a pilot. The best of the fighter pilots.
Has he a name, the best of the fighter pilots?
Manfred von Richthofen. Last year, still a cavalry officer. But have you ever tried to reconnoiter on horseback among the trenches and the barbed wire? We were all returned to the infantry, where I spent my time shooting wild boar. So I wrote to my superior, saying, Your Excellency, I did not go to war to collect milk and smelly cheese.
You are bragging. You cannot have written that way to a superior.
Why so? Because I am a well-mannered Prussian, from a good family? I wrote just that, Herr Oberleutnant, and got my transfer to the Air Force.
In 1915, Manfred von Richthofen is 23 years old. The future Red Baron is of aristocratic descent. Tradition dictates he should be a cavalryman, but he has decided to take to the skies. Von Richthofen's meeting with the German ace Bulker inspires the future Red Baron to become the best pilot ever.
Oswald Boelcke was considered Germany's master fighter pilot. He had developed and taught rules for aerial combat. He made demonstration flights and was very successful. His human qualities made him an exemplary leader.
You ready?
Ready.
Richthofen will soon realize that riding a horse is easier than flying an aeroplane.
Let's start again. Ready?
Left.
Concentrate, damn you. Here we go.
Left. Right. Left. Left and right.
How many more kites has our posh boy got to break? He would have been better off as an observer.
He'll never get his certificate.
Yeah.
We're not out of the woods yet.
No.
Let's drink to Richthofen.
Well done.
Richthofen.
I made all of the right maneuvers. It's just that the machine didn't react like it usually does.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's the constructor's fault.
Let's not have any hollow pride. You just got frightened.
It's nothing to do with being frightened.
Of course it was. Fear makes you clumsy, unable to control the plane's balance or think clearly. One thing leads to another. You do the wrong maneuver. Then you nosedive and break some wood.
Speaking from experience?
That's enough. Calm down, all of you. We've all been frightened. Everyone thinks it's unworthy of a defender of the fatherland, but they're wrong. Taking off in the face of that, that's courage. I was watching you up there. For a first solo flight, with only 24 hours tuition, apart from the landing, it wasn't bad at all. Believe me, Manfred will soon be the best out of all of us. The best of the fighter pilots.
Go on.
In the French camp, after repeated blandishments and pleas, Guynemer finally receives permission to learn to fly, thanks to the goodwill of Captain Bernard Thierry, who adds him to the new list of student pilots. One month later, Georges Guynemer makes his maiden flight and receives his military diploma, but he is clumsy and damages several machines. It's thought that he will end up killing himself, or worse still, his observer or his comrades on the ground. Guynemer and Richthofen are not the only ones to experience a difficult start. The German Ernst Udet is just 19 when he arrives at the base at Saint-Quentin.
We know that his application to enlist was turned down. Udet was just 1.6 meters tall. He didn't come from a noble or privileged family. He ended up being a volunteer motorcyclist behind the front, a role which did not suit him in the slightest. He was trained by his own officer and applied once again to the Air Force, and this time was successful.
After a bombing raid, Udet crashes. He spends 14 days in hospital, at the end of which he's ready to try again.
Corporal, don't tell me you have the intention of flying again.
Of course I have, Captain. I've made a complete recovery.
Would you believe it? He really believes he'll get another chance. But his recklessness has cost the country an excellent new aircraft, and he almost killed his observer.
They were all looking at me as if I'd committed parricide.
Listen. Corporal Udet has been found guilty of careless flying, putting in peril the life of his observer, and causing us to lose a perfectly good machine will be punished. He will be under arrest for 7 days. Please make your way immediately to the authorities. We do not want to see you on an airfield again. May that be a lesson to all of you.
All right, I flew recklessly. Yes, that's forbidden. But it's only forbidden because of a bunch of bureaucrats who've never flown. You can't just get rid of me.
I was being punished unjustly, and I was thinking of my parents. My dad was so proud of me being a pilot. What was I going to tell him? That I was being thrown in prison and then cast aside as something useless?
Since the previous winter, the war has intensified, and the chiefs of staff of the two enemy forces have started to realize that this is becoming a war of attrition. The French army has put in an order for 500 aircraft, but very soon there are difficulties. The constructors realize that in a year they will only be able to build 167 of the 500 machines requested. At the time, there are only two kinds of engine: the inline engine used in the car industry and the rotary engine used in aviation. The latter has two major drawbacks. It's difficult to assemble, and there are very few workshops in France capable of building it. Conversely, inline engines are quick and simple to make and are built in dozens of workshops throughout the country. Unfortunately, these inline engines are also very heavy. At this point in the war, the best solution for the aircraft is to use the much lighter rotary engine. 4 models of aircraft are eventually retained by the French army: the Farman 7 for reconnaissance, the Caudron G3 for artillery directing and observation, the Morane-Saulnier Parasol for dogfighting, and the Voisin LA-5 for bombing. At this point in time, France is master of the skies. Two-seater planes are still the most common and widespread. If there is a pilot who is predicted to have an illustrious future from day one, it's Paul René Fonck, who comes from the Vosges. He is a working-class lad who hasn't been rejected like the others, but is called up to serve his country at the beginning of the war. He's 20 years old. From a humble background, he sees his enlistment into the army as an opportunity to advance his career swiftly. He starts off, as all pilots at that time, as an observer.
Fonck is not the most outgoing of people. He's quite reserved. I would say he's quite calculating, and in his lifestyle is very aesthetic, which makes him different to a lot of his comrades. He's been an orphan from the age of 5 and has been brought up with the spirit of revenge for the 1870 war.
From that first flight, my apprehension was swiftly blown away. I now wished for only one thing: to demonstrate my new skills and achieve my first victory. However, I was confined to reconnaissance missions. I would fly out in the morning and at night, sometimes over the Alsatian side, sometimes over the French side. I regulated the artillery fire on the batteries and enemy trenches. But deep down inside, I always harbored the hope that an enemy aeroplane would appear on the horizon so that I could have it out with him.
From the beginning of 1915, the war has extended geographically, inexorably towards the eastern fronts, before stabilizing without either side having claimed a significant victory. In France, as in Germany, the aeronautical industry has moved on apace. Arming their aircraft has become the focus of their research and trials.
In the early days of the war, the weapons carried were not at all adapted to the aircraft's mission. Pilots carried anything to defend themselves with, such as rifles, pistols, and even bricks that they would throw at their opponent. But there were no specially commissioned weapons.
They mainly throw fléchettes, which are steel darts that look like pencils with flights on. They are thrown in bundles of 100 or 500. The whistling sound they make is extraordinary and very scary. It is said that they can go through a cavalryman and his horse. Having said that, they're ineffective, although quite dangerous, but the effect is more psychological than anything else.
It very soon becomes evident that the weaponry should be firmly fixed, pointing in the direction the plane is flying to achieve maximum efficiency. but the propeller is a problem. Roland Garros tests a new prototype which trials an automatic rifle fixed to the front, with armor plating at the back of the propeller to protect it from any bullets that might ricochet off it. This forward firing proves to be a fearsome weapon. Roland Garros shoots down 3 enemies in 2 weeks, the first victories to be achieved by a man flying solo at the controls of a one-seater. He becomes a war hero.
But Garros, in the wake of his last victory, has to make an emergency landing and his plane is seized by the Germans, in spite of his attempt to set it on fire.
At the same time, Guynemer is sent to perfect his skills with the MS-3 Stork Squadron at Vosgien, under the orders of Commander Brocard. He has no sooner arrived than he wrecks another 2 planes. "Get rid of the little fool," Brocard tells Védrine. The venerated pilot Védrine chooses to defend the youngster, promising he will soon prove himself. Védrine, who was Guynemer's boyhood hero, becomes his mentor. Guynemer is ecstatic. From then on, everything changes. That morning, Guynemer requests authorization to make a flight, accompanied only by his mechanic, Gerder.
Be careful, Corporal. Don't wreck it. Don't you trust me? After all this time watching you, I know this kite. I can take a carburetor apart, fix a valve,
Solder a fuel pipe, even.
perfectly.
Maybe so. But not as well as I can.
Are those boots the best you can do?
Eh? What do you mean?
Well, it's not really suitable for flying.
Flying? You mean now?
We'll grab the kite and off we'll go.
Just you and me? But have you got...
Authorization? Yes.
Right. Well, I just need a minute to put something else on.
Are those all right?
Well, yeah.
Keep them on then. There isn't a moment to lose. Is the machine gun loaded at least?
I've checked everything.
Probably for the best. Who knows what we'll run into up there?
Bumps and bush.
Off we go then.
As a journalist wrote, the aircraft would become his friend, the best he had, an extension of himself. This plaything enables him to soar away from the Earth. The sky is his new world, a perfect world. Flying at this time is highly dangerous. To find the courage to take off or engage in combat, airmen have to learn to forget the extreme fragility of the machines.
Some people say that I'm green, inexperienced. But I'll show them that I'm reliable. Yesterday, Gerdin and I installed a new tripod designed to support the machine gun. I just hope it won't get jammed. I want to run into a German and fill him full of holes.
A German fighter suddenly bursts out of the sun.
Where is the bugger? Over there, another one! Gardien, fire!
The gun's jammed!
His first battle, his first victory, and a first military medal for Guynemer, who will become known as the Iron Kid. His mechanic will also be decorated. These are the young chaps who are going to win the war for us, their officer cries. Two days after Guynemer's first victory, on the 21st of July 1915, Paul René Fonck finally has his first taste of combat. But his opponent manages to escape. His first kill will have to wait. Little does he know that for him, success will be a long time coming. The war has been raging on for 12 months. While at the beginning of the conflict, the great European powers were the only ones involved, alliances and the desire to control other nations' colonies have made this into a global conflict. The Turks have the Suez Canal in their sights. The British are defending their interests in Mesopotamia. Bulgaria and Albania are involved in the conflict in Serbia. The Russians attack Hungary, while the Italians attack the Austrians at Isonzo. In southwestern Africa, the Germans are being attacked by South African and Rhodesian troops. The sky may only be a secondary theatre of operations, but the French and the Germans are in desperate need of aviators. Corporal Udet is requisitioned for a bombing mission over Belfort. He had thought he was permanently banned from flying, and now he is being asked to return to active service. The Germans, having seized the aeroplane flown by Roland Garros, are hoping it will inspire them to perfect their own equipment. The Dutch engineer Anthony Fokker, who works for them, has developed a machine gun which works in synchronization with the propellers. He's equipped the new engines with these guns, and the Fokker series is born. It will become the Allies' worst nightmare. The German pilots will finally be able to avenge their defeat at the Marne. It's around this time that Manfred von Richthofen, whose training flights have ended up making quite an impression, is awarded his pilot's badge. In February 1916, the interminable Battle of Verdun begins.
Verdun is the biggest battle in the history of warfare. It begins on the 21st of February 1916. The French have virtually no squadrons with which to oppose the well-organized Germans.
Verdun was one of the first examples of the strategy of grouping of armed forces. There was a concentration of aircraft, which was supposed to support the attacking ground forces.
It's a big problem for us, because they not only go after our observation planes, but the fighters too. The few fighters we have are getting caught by groups of aircraft. The first pitched battles take place in the skies over Verdun.
And so thousands of shells rain down on the north and northeast sides of Verdun, which very soon creates the landscape which you see in the photographs taken at the time. This lunar landscape, where you can lose your bearings, where infantrymen do lose their bearings. But these lost bearings are not just a problem for the infantry, but also for the airmen. Because every few hours the destroyed landscape would change, and so pilots can no longer rely on the information they have gathered beforehand.
Whilst the Germans dominate the skies, some young French pilots are not afraid to fly despite the high risks. Fighting far from Verdun, in the Somme, Guynemer, a perfectionist, leaves nothing to chance. He hones his style and his technique, which consists of swooping down out of the sun, and he starts racking up the victories. Behind the controls of his machine sits the tortured soul who once slapped a schoolteacher who had called him the smallest kid in the class.
The snot-nosed kid I still am has been at it again. I avenged a friend of mine who was shot down yesterday, and there was not one bullet in my kite. Lady Luck is still with me.
It's incredible. Flying at over 100 kilometers an hour. Can you imagine the pilot holding the joystick with his knees? Getting up and removing the empty magazine, replacing it with a full one, and then taking back control? While he does this, he is obviously at the mercy of his opponent. So he generally flies away from the battle zone to complete this maneuver. Alongside the bombing, dogfighting would initially develop with the aim of countering observation and artillery adjustment. But of course, you can see a knock-on effect. The hunters become the hunted. As we try to protect our air force, including our fighter aircraft. So aerial combat became an activity in its own right.
This tragedy, which has already killed nearly 1 million people in 2 years, causes the public to become attached to the pilots. Each of their exploits shines like a beacon of hope in the darkness. It's decided to keep account of their victories in the form of kill tallies.
In France, you need 5 confirmed victories to become an ace. And for a victory to be recorded, the enemy aircraft has to be brought down in front of 2 French witnesses, and it has to fall behind French lines. Otherwise, it's a probable kill.
In Germany, a victory had to be confirmed by at least 2 witnesses. Ideally, the aircraft would have fallen on the right side of enemy lines, and the victory would then be validated.
The English rely on a man's word of honor. That means that if 2 English airmen attack the same enemy, they can both claim a victory. However, this can make things awkward when victories are counted in relation to planes shot down.
A French reconnaissance plane escorted by 4 fighters is about to have a tragic encounter and discover the Germans' latest fighter plane, the Fokker D-2. It's the first aircraft equipped with synchronized machine guns. Ernst Udet sees that for the first time he could grab his chance. Outnumbered 5-1, the young German pilot flies into battle with the fearless folly of youth. Following his master Oswald Bürger's instructions, he swoops down on his enemy.
When I was 80 meters away, I could start firing. But only if I was sure of success. Closer, closer, closer. "50 meters. 40. 30. Fire! At that moment, I don't really feel these are men who are dying. It's hard, it's cruel, but that's the pitiless reality of war.
On the 18th of March 1916, Ernst Udet finally records his own first confirmed victory. The chivalrous aspect of these aerial duels has often been highlighted by literature, film, and the media. But was it based on reality?
There's a lot of talk about chivalry in the First War. By and large, this was rubbish. They were out to kill the opposition, and it didn't really matter how they did that, providing they got away from the front. There's no use waving goodbye to a guy because you think his guns are empty, because he may come back next day and either kill you or kill your best mate. So if you can kill him, you kill him.
Today, Fonck has finally recorded his first official victory 2 years after he flew for the first time.
2 aircraft, 2 rumplers bearing down on me. I was just thinking about all those chaps who were watching from the trenches. I couldn't let them down. But I couldn't do anything stupid either. My plane was inferior, so I tried to pick out the one who was most frightened, the one likely to panic. And vroom! I flew straight at him. I wanted to force him to land on our side of the lines, twisting and turning, spinning and banking. We plummeted 4,000 meters before I finally forced him down. The 2 Krauts couldn't take any more, and they surrendered.
Kill or be killed. More and more pilots find themselves driven by hatred. Among them is the British pilot Edward Manock. Born in Ireland, Edward Manock grew up in a typically poor district in Victorian England. Early in the war, while working as a telephone engineer in Turkey, he is taken prisoner. His health having deteriorated behind their bars, the Turks, who were allies of the Germans, decided that this sickly man who is virtually half blind due to a childhood illness is of no military use. When they send him home, they never imagine that what they are in fact liberating is a future hero of the skies.
Second Lieutenant Manock, sir. I've been sent to...
At ease. Very well, stripped to the waist.
Determined to become a pilot, he knows that the catastrophically bad vision in his left eye is a handicap he will have to overcome.
One more time. How's your vision, old chap?
Fine. Just fine.
Turn around. Cover your right eye. Ah, the right one, I said. Read that line.
MRTVFUENCXOZT.
That last T was in fact a D. But apart from that, it was perfect. You can put your clothes back on. We need chaps like you.
On the 14th of August 1916, Edward Manock is admitted to the military flying school in Reading. 1916 is the year during which the British Air Force proves itself, thanks to its pilots and its new squadrons. The aviator William Leaf Robinson shows the way by flying to a height of more than 11,000 feet and attacking an airship, causing an explosion that is seen from 150 kilometers away. Autumn 1916 marks the beginning of England's pilots' ability to defend their country. At certain times, the Allies have the technological advantage, and at other times, the Germans can claim aerial superiority. And during these periods, the respective nations' air races cover themselves in glory.
The aces have become larger than life in a way. And many of them, when they are walking around town, for example, when they were on leave, get recognized. And there's a certain admiration. Let's not forget that these are young men who are between 20 and 25 years old. When they start to become famous, naturally a kind of court forms around them, which they are certainly not immune to.
And occasionally, a rising star of the stage meets a fellow star from the sky.
Goodbye, darling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yvonne Printemps, who made her debut aged 14 at the Folies Bergère and the Cigale in roles which were rather saucy, had been noticed by Sacha Guitry. He had fallen madly in love with her and had started writing plays for her.
Please excuse me, they told me that I could,
Wait for me here. Was hoping you would. When they told me Lieutenant Guynemer was in the theatre, well. Tell me, what did you think of the play?
I really enjoyed it. You and Sasha, together, you...
Me and Von. It's all just theatre, you know. I'm only his mistress on stage, that's all. Oh. I'm getting carried away, please forgive me. It's not every day that the Ace of Aces comes to watch me on stage, then calls on me in my dressing room.
Ace of Aces. Please, call me George.
But you're a hero. Each of your 35 victories is like a new victory at the Marne. Wasn't it Mortain who wrote that? The Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre. Don't be embarrassed.
I just don't know.
And modest as well. Remember, you're the one they're building new planes for. What do they call that new one?
The Spat. Yes.
And never mind all that. Where shall we go now?
How do you mean?
How about Maxime's? Do you know it?
That sounds perfect.
The two youngsters soon become France's most glamorous couple. They almost make people forget the war. In the skies over Verdun, French air power, which had been numerically crushed early on, is back on top form. The Battle of Verdun marks a decisive stage, demonstrating that aerial superiority is an essential corollary to ground warfare. France goes from having 10 to 111 squadrons, and from having 130 aircraft to over 1,100 at the front. Thanks to Guynemer, Nungesser, and a host of other pilots, the Allies reconquer the sky over Verdun. They inflict such heavy losses on their enemies that the German High Command has no choice but to find a riposte. Jaster 2, the squadron commanded by Oswald Bölker, has just taken off for its 5th mission of the day. Their objective is to engage with British reconnaissance aircraft, which they have identified near the front.
It was under the orders of Bölker that I achieved my first victory 1 month earlier. It was he who taught me everything. Everything he said was sacred, and with every engagement, I scrupulously follow his guidelines. Always be sure of having an advantageous position before attacking. Climb before you approach in order to surprise the enemy from a higher altitude. Swoop down quickly from behind when you attack. Do not shoot until the enemy is well within range and perfectly lined up in your sights. If you think that your opponent has been hit, follow him all the way to the ground to ensure his total destruction.
Whilst in the midst of an attacking maneuver, Bölker is hit by fire from one of his own squadron's planes. Immediately, Richthofen turns from his target and begins to spiral around his leader, anxiously following his efforts to save his damaged aeroplane. His spine fractured. Oswald Bölker is killed outright.
I was the one chosen to represent his squadron and bear his medals at his funeral at the cathedral in Cambrai. My grief at his death was as if an elder brother had died.
Seething with a spirit of revenge, Richthofen marks up 2 further kills, highlighted in the propaganda press. He has a habit, as soon as a plane has been shot down, of landing quickly and jumping in a car, so that he can go and examine the damage he has caused. Like a hunter, he uses a knife to cut away a piece of tailplane canvas to send to his mother, who will hang the trophy on his bedroom wall. But in the Somme at Verdun, on the eastern fronts, aerial combat is also managing to make its own imprint on the war. These Knights of the Sky enjoyed a level of prestige far greater than that of other soldiers, whose daily grind consists of crawling through the mud of the trenches. Every day across all fronts, 5,000 soldiers meet their death. The slaughter of the first 2 years of the war takes on a magnitude never previously seen at this point in the early 20th century.
Look there, Captain. It's Stork Squadron.
Stop there. Calm down. We've just been relieved from the front line, and my men would like to see Guynemer if possible.
That's his plane, Old Charles. Lieutenant Guynemer, we saw you yesterday. You flew over our trenches. It warmed our hearts.
Lower your gun.
Line up, you men. Attention! I don't want to make your hands dirty.
Don't worry. When I started out, my captain thought my hands were too clean.
You're like a god to us.
A god who's just 1.70 meters tall?
The fact is, with you, sir, we feel protected, not abandoned.
Any day that we don't see an aeroplane, we're like kids who haven't had their pudding.
Well, you know, we do whatever we can to stop the Boche, spot their machine guns, and tell you whether they've been destroyed.
Fighters in the air and on land, hand in hand, like brothers in arms. The Battle of the Somme resulted in more than 1 million casualties. The Battle of Verdun claimed over 700,000 victims in 10 months. Conditions for the soldiers were inhumane.
For the French soldiers, they were a tonic. The soldiers lauded them because they helped them in battle. They saw it like this. When a plane bearing their insignia won a battle, the soldiers would celebrate wildly.
I think the majority of the guys on the ground wouldn't have put themselves in an airplane for love nor money. They saw this as a very dangerous occupation because they went over the top. Over the top means the soldiers go over the top of the trenches and charge into the machine guns. But that was only every now and again, perhaps every 2 months or more sometimes. These flying guys were over the top every day, fighting every day, going down in flames every day.
Idolized, seen as demigods, the airmen were in fact mere mortals, terribly exposed. On the 23rd of November 1916, Richthofen fights and wins a terrible duel with the great British air ace Lenoe Hawker. He doesn't change his habits, landing near his victim and claiming a souvenir.
Dear Mother, my battle with this Englishman was the most dreadful of all those I have ever fought. When we were 1,000 meters above the earth, he gave me a friendly wave. But I ended up hitting him right in the head with a bullet. He crashed behind our lines, his machine guns stuck in the ground. It's now an ornament on my bedroom wall.
1916 comes to an end. Richthofen and Guynemer will soon have to contend with a new generation of pilots. Fonck, Udet, Manock, as well as Americans, Canadians, Belgians, Italians, and Russians. Aerial warfare and the aeronautical industry will, at the same time, also enter a new era.